first of all need to properly explain why the vulnerability is there and then prove the impact. So POCs, they are extremely valuable, and every time there isn't a POC is like quite painful because the person reviewing it almost needs to do the bug hunt for the Whitehat, right? And the POC makes everything clear, not just for the reviewers but for the researcher itself.
GM everyone, my name is DeGatchi, your host, and I'm here with GmHacker from Immunefi. How's it going, man?
Hello, glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Pleasure to have you on. We've been friends for quite some time, but we've never actually spoken, so this is our first real talkative interaction. So we'll definitely put this one in the books. I think it'll be a great introduction to... A great intro would be basically, what do you do right now?
Sure. Currently, I essentially do triaging, smart contract triaging at Immunefi. Also, I kind of lead the development of any potential smart contract solutions that we do. Yeah, basically that's it. That's my main work is at Immunefi.
Immunefi, sweet. And how long have you been there for?
So I started as a Whitehat scholar. Immunefi had, I don't think they run this as of now. They might have stopped it. They might run it in the future, but they ran a Whitehat scholarship where basically, essentially you would get paid to transition potentially to a Whitehat living, essentially. So I entered into that. I also had met a lot of people from the company before, which was interesting. I'm based in Lisbon, and some of them are from Lisbon. And yeah, eventually after the scholarship, I got a job as a triager. And yeah, that's been like, the scholarship was a year ago, essentially.
Right. And I know that Immunefi is known for their public contests. So what is the difference really between, and I guess it's an in-house triager and I guess a contractor / public contest participant?
Oh, you mean between a Whitehat and a triager or something like that?
Yeah. So you've been like basically hired by Immunefi to be a triager, Whitehat.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between them?
So Immunefi, as a bug bounty platform, you have a lot of people that basically, it is an open platform essentially, so people can just Whitehat. They can just try to find vulnerabilities in projects, in live projects, and you don't need to be at all associated to Immunefi. You can just, if you find a vulnerability, you'll go to Immunefi and report it. Then you had this scholarship where it was basically like a support for certain people to do that kind of living, but not at all the typical thing to do. And then a triager is actually a person at the Immunefi company, associated to Immunefi, and the triagers will get the bug reports and kind of they triage. So they will check whether the bug report is valid, whether the vulnerability exists, and what would be a fair payout for the researcher.
So you're like basically you review the reports, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, got you. Yeah. Okay, I thought triager as in like you're an in-house security. Okay, that makes complete sense. Maybe it's just the name. Sweet. So you're basically reviewing people's reports and seeing whether they're correct or, basically reviewing them. One thing I would like to ask is, like, how did you get into all of this? Like, where did your career start and then finally got into reviewing public contest reports, all that kind of stuff?
Sure. So basically, I started working as a software engineer when I was at a university still. I was doing aerospace engineering, and in the end of it, like it's 5 years, and in the fourth year, I basically wanted already to get married. To be honest, that was mostly the reason for starting to work. Basically, I wanted to get some money. So I started working as a software engineer. I had the luck basically of starting that sort of work. I had to learn most of stuff at the job, though I had learned how to program in C in low level languages. And essentially that was more of a even it grew to be sort of embedded systems engineering, a lot of microcontroller stuff, also just the typical Raspberry Pi and server. So it grew to a sort of sysadmin position or sysadmin kind of job. And yeah, that's how I started. And I immediately understood that actually what I wanted to do was, yeah,
Yeah.
code,
Okay.
being a software engineer, etc. I then transitioned into the banking industry, work at
Okay.
a bank.
As a software engineer or like just a.
Yes, also as
Okay.
a
Right.
software engineer, basically trying to reform some of the technologies. We were working on a very math heavy analytics library that was in C++, very old C++. We were trying to do testing in Python because
Okay.
all the testing was done with Excel spreadsheets.
Oh god. All right.
Yeah, and it was very difficult actually to reform anything because the older engineers are very set to their own
Yeah.
ways.
Yep.
For
Yep.
example, we couldn't convince them to use Git. They were using Subversion, which is it, which was something I had never heard or seen
Yeah. Yeah.
before.
Some like custom tool or
It's
something.
like Git. It's like Git, but older, I guess.
Okay. Like pre-Git stage.
Yeah, exactly. It's also to
Okay.
to version control, but yeah, a little bit worse in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyways, then I went to an IT company here in Portugal, focused on digital TV. And
Gotcha.
this was a lot of just jumping around
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
different industries. But it was at this time during this particular company that I eventually heard about crypto.
Yep.
I met some friends that essentially really pressured me into, yeah, you should definitely learn how to program smart contracts. So I started studying that on the side, and immediately I got hooked. To be honest, I
Yep.
just the first thing I did was to read the Bitcoin white paper, and
Mm-hmm.
just that I immediately fell in love with it. To be
Got
honest, I
filled.
really thought it was an ingenious engineering idea.
Yep.
And yeah, so all the moments during work and after work where I had some where I wasn't working, essentially I was just studying.
Reading up. Yeah.
Yeah, just a ton of stuff. So and when the security part of it entered into play, because what I found out was, at least my impression was that the security researchers in the space were the ones that deeply knew the technology,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what I wanted. I wanted to deeply understand the technology. I also convinced my company to allow me to do some courses, or not
Okay.
to do, but to lecture
Sure.
some courses
Okay.
to the other employees. So I would use this as an excuse for me to force me to learn stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I lectured Python courses, some data science courses as well, and then I convinced them to for me to lecture courses about Bitcoin, about smart contracts, etc. So it would force me to learn to actually learn the technologies, and
And then
basically eventually I just suddenly realized, man, I just need to start working in this industry to really learn on the job, to learn with people that know more
direct
than
experience.
myself. Yeah,
Gotcha.
and so yeah, I made a deep dive essentially, and it
Mm-hmm.
was a really good decision.
And then you got into Immunefi, like basically reporting through that. I'm assuming. Like, how did you start that kind of journey?
Yeah, I just sent out a whole bunch of curriculums. I was already I would say like a good software engineer. So when I learned smart contracts and I made a deep dive into the EVM, etc. Uh,
Right.
I thought I was confident that I could do some Solidity developer work,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't have anything to to support that claim, right? That I
Okay.
knew the sort
Like
of
public
stuff. So
projects.
I tried building up my GitHub with some repos, with some solutions to CTFs, etc. Yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
eventually, after sending just a bunch of curriculums to so many places, there was one company that accepted me. It was called Rhythm Network, which is something most people never heard of.
Yep.
But anyways, they let me do Solidity work, which was the goal essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So that was very cool. And after that, I just started doing a lot of freelancing stuff, always Solidity development
Yep.
in an NFT marketplace as well, in some companies that wanted to build out smart contracts. Yeah, and by the time I eventually applied to the Whitehat scholarship of Immunefi, because Immunefi was always from the beginning a company that I was following
Mm-hmm.
due to the security researchers and etc.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I jumped into Immunefi. At the same time, I jumped into a blockchain academy as well, where I was lecturing just blockchain stuff, which
Yeah. Yeah.
also helped me a lot to grow. And yeah,
So a lot of
that's
content creation, and then that's how you're building sort of your resume, and then you kind of supplied for the scholarship thing, and then it just really, it was like a gateway into Immunefi, right?
yeah, exactly. That was basically it. They still have very, I would say, very difficult a very difficult hiring process
For
to become
sure.
a triager and
What did it kind of
some
look
is
like?
basically yeah. I'll just say right away how it is. They do have a part like a social part where you really need to fit into the team.
Yeah,
They
cultural
really want, yeah, they really want people to be aligned
align.
and to have the same
Yeah,
culture, etc. uh, which is just a culture of transparency and
it makes sense.
just
Yeah, you want people to be on
yeah,
the same kind of
yeah,
vibe as you, get along, all that stuff, same visions,
especially for a security company. I also think that they have
standards
more
and stuff.
trust issues as well.
Yeah, for sure. So basically, you did that, and then I guess there was like technical. Did they make you like write reports or review anything for this kind of
Yeah,
thing?
exactly. It was really just to like, oh, at 10 a.m. At a given day, you will receive an email with code,
Yeah.
and you will have 4 hours to submit a report on that code.
Okay. Oh, so it was like a contest kind of thing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It was just
Yeah.
finding at as many vulnerabilities as I possibly
Okay.
could, and the code was insanely faulty. So it
Okay.
was just full of vulnerabilities, but that was actually pretty weird because the vulnerabilities would pile up,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously they had a sort of threshold. Also, the important vulnerabilities that I needed to find,
Yeah.
and yeah, it was basically
And you
that.
built, so you built like a report, basically find all the vulnerabilities, and this is basically to see if you can identify the bugs. So if someone, let's say, like for your for basically reviewing reports, you've got to see what they've submitted, see if that's true, check the proof of concept. Um, so it's creating a report instead of reviewing it. So that's a bit weird. How does that
Yeah,
kind of
that's
correlate?
true. That's true. I guess it's also a way to understand your fundamentals,
Okay,
whether
right, yeah.
you actually understand. For example, you would probably have a bug like a classic reentrancy bug, right?
Mm-hmm.
So naturally, they would expect me to find that out. But maybe
Mm.
there were a little bit more some bugs that were harder to eventually reach a meaningful impact, for example,
Yep,
and
yep.
those bugs will tell a lot about your skill set, for example. Anyways, it's not the same as finding bugs is not the same as reviewing a
Reviewing.
report.
Because you're given the
But
answers,
yeah,
right? Yeah. So I assume.
exactly. The report will have the answer, or maybe not. It's not as straightforward, but yeah, it's more like
Mhm.
it actually tells you to look at this specific part, right?
Yeah.
While
I,
when hunting for a bug, you don't
mhm.
know where the bugs are. Yeah.
I think it's very interesting to see this kind of side of bug bounties and even just auditing in general. Because you've got one aspect which is finding the bugs, detecting them, right? But how can you convey that to the client customer in a meaningful way that could teach them how to be better in the future and where they've gone wrong, so they can prevent this, in future iterations. So, having said that, for basically audit firms and private auditors, all that kind of stuff, what do you think is missing slash can be improved on for making a high quality report? Like what differentiates a low quality report from a high quality report?
Oh wow, that's a heavy question. So there's always a lot of just time constraining, to be honest. What I see is that there's a lot of firms or people that for a given report will have a lot of time to actually dive deep into the code, to actually understand everything, and just have your time to play around with the code, right? Like
Mhm.
to basically be creative about it, just thinking about it during your day, even after work hours. The code just lives a little bit in your head, and you
Mhm.
just hallucinate a little bit. That's how I've heard being said, which is like, what if this particular part would break, or if I can change the order of something, etc. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's I would say a very valuable part of an auditor, or having an auditing firm review your code.
Mhm.
And I do think that when I see an audit report that has, again, some projects might just not have these vulnerabilities, but when a report has a lot of business flow errors, like
Yeah.
logic errors, those normally tell me that the auditor really dove deep into the code, really
Mhm.
understood what was the point of the code, to find those vulnerabilities, right? It's not the same as there are some address zero checks that are missing here and there, which
Yeah.
is also valuable. But actually, most of those small misses can be built up to a larger impact.
Mhm.
And yeah, you typically see reports with that. You immediately think that, wow, these reports, okay, they do have quality. But again,
Mhm.
all auditors will have time constraints. So for
Yeah.
example, for code arena, typically the bugs found, they are found in a speed running style, right,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
auditors don't have as much time to just dive into the code and
Yeah.
think about
Fully
it,
comprehensive.
etc. Yeah.
Yep.
And yeah.
So I guess like let's say we do have these kind time constraints. What do you think are like some really best practices for making a quality report in the shortest amount of time? Like if you have like a week to do, a week or two for a report, basically,
Do you, do you mean in like the just the report quality?
yeah, report quality. Let's say they found the bugs
Okay.
already and they have like a short amount of time to write a report. How can they make it, really top tier quality for the amount of time they have?
Yeah, good question. I think also that applies to bug hunting as well, not just
Yeah,
auditing.
exactly. Yeah.
So the most important part, white hats and auditors, quite often they just assume that
Mm-hmm.
the project, because the code is from the project, they will understand a lot of things. So they can just write a report that doesn't need to say, it can omit a lot of the details.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, which is not a good approach, because often enough you will
Mm-hmm.
have people reviewing those reports that are not like fully familiar with the code as a project, like the
Yeah.
triagers, the judges, etc. And it should be pretty clear what the impact is of a
Yep.
bug. So meaning not just like fitting it into a vulnerability type, but rather
Mhm.
fitting it into an impact type. Okay, that's
Okay.
how, for example, at Immunefi we check the severity of bugs.
Yep.
It is completely correlated to impact. So you can find a reentrancy bug in a given smart contract, but it all will depend on the actual impact of that vulnerability. Okay.
Gotcha.
And so for that, you first of all need to properly explain why the vulnerability is there, and then prove the impact. So POCs, they are extremely valuable,
Yep.
and every time there isn't a POC is like quite painful, because the
Right.
person reviewing it almost needs to do
Do
the
it
bug hunt
themselves.
for the Whitehat, right? And the POC makes everything clear, not just for the reviewers, but for the researcher itself.
Yeah, yeah. Solidifying that actually works.
Yeah, exactly. And most of the time it can actually tell you, oh, after all, the impact is not as meaningful as I thought, or there is some particular part of the code that actually doesn't allow me to do this. Especially for speed running, this is super valuable to really make sure that you are actually reporting an existing vulnerability.
So, touching on proof of concepts, since that's such a critical thing for a report to be, high quality, how do you actually make a high quality proof of concept and presenting that to your client?
Good question. So doesn't need to be like super code heavy, but also shouldn't be pseudocode. Okay,
Right.
and it shouldn't be bullet points and nothing like that. If you want to have like bullet point explaining, you put comments explaining the code of your POC. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
but it should be the ideal is always like a test script
Right.
where the client can just have it and run it. But I'm thinking mostly in bug hunting, like at Immunefi. But in
Okay.
audits, normally there isn't like a ton of time to do a full test script.
Right.
So, but you should at least have the code that they can copy and paste into a test script. Okay, whether it
Right.
is just an attacking contract in Solidity,
Yeah.
or a forge like function script
Yeah, like a
function,
fork type of.
or maybe a TypeScript one, where basically just they they can understand what the hell you are doing with their smart contracts,
Mm-hmm.
but just by looking at the calls.
Mm-hmm.
But also they can run it if they are, or at least there's a very small amount of steps to allow them to run the proof of concept.
Right. So if you want to present, I guess there's two ways of doing it. There's two things I want to touch on. Is okay. So we're talking about off chain. I mean, yeah, off chain reports and audits. So the state isn't actually live, and you haven't got it initialized in any way. So how would you make a
Sure.
proof of concept that can be executed, but you haven't it's not actually deployed. So I guess you would have to deploy it first, put all the state. And if it's a massive repo, right, how do you do that in effective
Yeah,
way?
good question. So you can just create a test file or a function or a test function, just like the tests that the project already has, hopefully.
If it has tests, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So you can just do it unit test style, okay?
Right.
Not running against live
State.
addresses,
Yeah.
because they don't exist, but as if you were running a unit test and it actually breaks,
Mm-hmm.
or it is, or it passes and you are attacking it, and then you do
Mm-hmm.
some console logs or whatever. But
Yeah.
doesn't need to be that. If the code is explanatory enough, you don't need to build a full unit test,
Right.
as long as you provide like the important calls to lead to the impact. So
Got you.
I've seen a lot of proof of concept. This might be like a misunderstanding. A lot of proof of concepts that prove I'm thinking at Immunefi, of course, but
Yep,
that
yep.
prove the vulnerability existence, but they don't prove at all the impact. So they would go like having some code, and they will stop when they prove like, oh, as you can see, I
Execute.
can, I can call this more times than it should, for
Mm-hmm.
example, or something like that. And then you'll have like a comment saying, so because of that, you could drain the contract. But you're like, oh, whoa, hold on a second. So how do you drain the contract, right? You
Right.
need to provide also the code that will do that.
Yeah.
And there's this is so frequent. This is really like
Oh, really? They're
the
just missing half of
majority.
it.
Yeah, majority of proof of concepts will do this. Will just well, even the like elite hackers, they might just assume that you understood. Okay, at this point I'm pretty sure you understood that I could damage your contract heavily, but often enough it's not at all obvious.
Yeah.
And in others it's just like, oh, because of that you can I can drain your contract, but they might just not know how to exploit the vulnerability actually. So they
Mm-hmm.
need to provide, and actually this is just the proof of concept is for the researchers' benefit. It's like
Yeah.
a really good argumentation, really making the case for the bounty they want to get paid. So if your proof of concept is really good and really explanatory and and makes everybody understand the impact really well,
Mm-hmm.
then it will be easy to provide you a fair payout as well.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah, and another thing I wanted to touch on was so there's two different types of auditing. There's obviously off chain, which is like pre deployment, and there's also post deployment where it's on chain. So I guess if you found a bug on chain and it's actively open for exploitation for like anybody to come, like blackout, what would you expect from someone that found an on chain vulnerability and they wanted to be a white hat? How do you think they would structure the report and this process of actually bringing the white hat into existence and like notifying the team, etc., like that? How do you think that goes?
So you mean from the point you find a live vulnerability,
Yeah,
right?
let's say I've been studying a project for a little bit, and
Yeah.
I found something, and it's let's say it's already been audited, but I found something while it's been deployed. How do I disclose that? What's the process? What's the proper
Yeah.
way?
So the first thing you need to do is you need to see whether the project has a bug bounty program or not. Whether
Okay.
it is at Immunefi or if they've got their own bug bounty program,
Mm-hmm.
like something on their docs or whatever. If they don't have it, it will be at least you need to trust that can they can reward you with something. They
Yeah.
might just not, right? You can also shame them in the public square if they if they
Sure.
don't
Sure.
pay you anything, but will not be the same as just money. Hence why the existence of like bug bounty platforms.
Yeah.
But if they don't have it, I would still advise, of course, to report it responsibly. So you would need to speak with the team, like enter their Discord or something, find someone and
Mm-hmm.
DM them something like that, like, hey, I found this thing. I think it's pretty critical. Let's chat or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And eventually you would need to provide them the proof of the vulnerability they've got,
Right.
and then pray a little bit that they will reward you something,
Yeah.
which
For
is good.
sure.
Most of projects will do that, right?
Yeah.
And if they don't, maybe you don't have like a big incentive to be hunting a bug on that project. As if they have a platform like Immunefi, you need to, even though this is like exhilarating that you suddenly find a live exploit,
Mm.
and pretty critical, of course. The every minute counts. It seems, right?
Yeah.
Not only can it be exploit and potentially steal user funds, but actually also just on the matter of your payout, some other whitehat can front run you, right?
Yeah.
Some other researcher might find the vulnerability first. Still, you'd really need to properly write a report and
Yep.
making sure that you explain everything with great detail. And of
Yep.
course, the proof of concept will just serve as the proof for yourself as well that the impact actually exists.
Yeah, I'm sure that you would have to do a proof of concept before everything else, regardless. It's not
Yeah,
just like
exactly.
looking at it
Exactly.
to make sure it actually is exploitable.
Otherwise, yeah, I would always recommend that you do the proof of concept before, unless you are like absolutely sure and you are a seasoned white hat. Otherwise, you just need to really, yeah, you should build your proof of concept first to make sure that the vulnerability exists before you start like putting a team into incident response mode, right? And
Yeah.
suddenly it's nothing, and people just got stressed out about it.
One thing I would like to touch on is, so if you're making a report for basically a private audit, I guess how would you even build a reputation from just private audits, right? I guess it just becomes like networking and not really publicizing anything of the reports, even though that might be like a massive, key thing. So how do you like, the question is, how do you expand your network if you're just doing private audits for, let's say, a few people?
I see. Private audits meaning that, but then you can show off your reports, right?
Mm-hmm. I guess if they don't want it like disclosed, how would you?
Ah, that's unfortunate. Yeah, definitely. Even at Immunefi, there's a lot of bug reports, really juicy ones that don't ever see the light of day because
Gotcha. Yeah.
the project doesn't want it, and the
Mm-hmm.
researcher agrees. So you never actually see, even if
Mm-hmm.
it is a huge bounty. But yeah, you're right. That's harder, of course, if you have public reports. Like if you do private audits and the project lets you audit, lets you present a report. So essentially, just normal auditing without being a white hat hacker. Normally,
Mm-hmm.
normal audits will always be public. That is the way to build your reputation, like showing the vulnerabilities that you have found. And obviously public contests are extremely helpful for that. Code Arena style, for example, or Sherlock, you can just build a repo or like a portfolio with the vulnerabilities that you find. And even with the reports, you can hear interviews of some auditors from Spearbit, for example,
Yeah.
and Spearbit will actually values in the hiring process, actually values not just the vulnerabilities you have on your portfolio, but also how you reported it, how thorough is your reporting and your proof of concept writing. Other than that, yeah,
Right.
networking
Word of
truly
mouth.
is, yeah, but it is truly helpful, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
showing off your skills, showing off your progress, building everything that you try out and build to learn. If you can, just publicize it, just put it open source, share it on Twitter,
Yeah.
talk with other people that also have the same interests. All of that is super helpful.
Why did you choose to get into basically bug hunting, like report reviewing, instead of the actual process of attacking? Yeah. Why did you choose reviewing over participating?
Sure. Mostly, I decided to enter the Immunefi company, right? I knew some people there, and I knew also that working with them would provide me a really valuable experience. I still have much to learn, and hence why I thought that joining a company would help me with that. Of
Yeah. Yeah.
course, there's a lot of just pros and cons into just joining a company, especially in this sort of space where you
Yeah.
can have a lot of flexibility in so many ways,
Yeah.
particularly as an auditor, as a white hat hacker. But there's also value to basically going to some place where you see people that inspire you and that have more experience than yourself, and just
Mm-hmm.
learn with them. So for example, the Spearbeat model for me is like such an intelligent one, where you
Mm-hmm.
have teams and juniors, and then associate, whatever, seniors, leads, or
Yep.
whatever their ranking, and the higher ups will help the smaller ones, the ones with less experience, and you just see those highly experienced security researchers in action, right?
Mm-hmm.
You hear their tips, you work with them, and that's
Right.
a super valuable experience. Also, the experience of just being standalone, hunting and just grinding, it's really good as well. There's much to learn on that.
In report reading, it's a completely different field to finding the bugs directly. And are you like working under people like apprenticeships when you first start like shadowing, or is it purely just like you review and that's it?
So there's also pros of reviewing, much like you see people becoming judges in Code Arena. But here it is more, there's a bigger difference, which is the reviewing part of it. The reviewers will see reports and vulnerabilities that nobody else will see.
Okay, right.
A huge chunk of reports are private,
Yeah.
like a really big amount, and even critical ones.
Okay.
And the elite hackers, they just have a creativity to find an exploit that is beyond imagination. Really,
Yep.
it's really impressive to read, really challenging as well.
Considering you have all this experience with report reading and you see the elite hackers, like all of them building these reports, it's got to be like, from a fundamental point of view, like objectively, it seems like the best way to accelerate becoming an elite because you're reading everyone's report, you can see the quality. So what do you think is the most common thing you see in the elites? As you said, it's creative things, creative thinking. So what do you, can you elaborate on that, please?
Yes, I can. It's hard to explain even the hacker mentality. I really like thinking about it, and just there's so many different like hacker personalities. But in general, the elite hackers will find or will think about breaking your code in a way that nobody else thought of. Mind you, these are live contracts. They often enough went through a lot of auditing, and even
Yep.
with with a lot of reputation, in companies with a lot of reputation. But the hackers, it seems like when they suddenly focus on a particular code base, they
Mm-hmm.
will find something. It is really impressive, and mostly it's really out of the box. Okay,
Yeah.
so really an out of the box thinking, and with a high level thinking as well, where everything plays, whether potentially you have access to some $1 million, some large amount of money for a
Mm-hmm.
big period of time, or anything else, leveraging just a bunch of different technologies.
Yeah, like
It's
external
really
contract.
impressive. Yeah, it's really impressive. It doesn't mean an elite hacker doesn't mean that they write a quality report. Okay,
Right. Yeah.
sometimes the reports are they suck a little bit,
Okay.
because the elite might just have just so many assumptions that doesn't think about the fact that even the project doesn't fully understand what the actual vulnerability is, and
Yeah.
for the elite it just seems so obvious. And often
Yeah.
they have time constraints. They seem to have time constraints as well, or they
Yeah.
are aggressive in their negotiation process. So
Mm,
they will show the vulnerability, and they will say, oh, as you can see, there's this impact, like $1 million of impact, but I'm sure if I had time, I could grow this impact to $10 million, right? And you would go
right.
like, well, how would you do that? Please, in action, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. I think I never had this kind of perspective prior to this kind of chat, but it really seems like it's a very lucrative job in terms of information and research. And you can
Yeah.
really see what the best are doing. And you can compare of like, okay, what makes a good report, what makes a bad report, what makes a good, what are the most common vulnerabilities, which I want to like touch on as well. How people separate themselves, it becomes really apparent, right? When you read through, hundreds of reports like you probably have done, and for different like scenarios as well, like races, like the public contests, normal audits, there's got to be like a lot of differential factors involved. But yeah, just to touch on the most common critical vulnerabilities you see, even just like highs, mediums, what are like some patterns you see, or yeah, common ones?
Good question. I think that the common vulnerabilities have grown in the space, or have changed with time.
Yep.
You would see a lot of vulnerabilities that were typically found, like, for example, reentrancy, of course, the one that the most famous one,
Yeah.
always. They still exist, as you see from Pascal's repo on reentrancy attacks.
Mhm.
He keeps those records, and they still get exploited, right? So you don't
Yeah.
even see the ones that don't get exploited. But you can also see that they start to be less frequent. So
Yep.
I think that the bugs that start appearing, they are more complex, and they tend to require you to very deeply understand the code. So you no longer have those sort of bugs that you are just scanning through solidity lines, and there's a solidity line that is inaccurate, right?
Right.
There's a solidity line there that, or there's a missing solidity line.
Yep.
No, the difference now is really about business logic,
Mhm.
state machine changing. For example, if you see some of Trust's audit reports, for example,
Yeah.
and he's the same like that in just bug hunting. Most of his bugs are like finding, basically envisioning, seeing the higher level state machine that a given protocol is,
Mhm.
and managing to find the state that that the developers were not aware that it could exist, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Like a symbiotic relationship kind of thing.
yeah, exactly. And it is you really need to train that muscle of deeply understanding something, and
Yep.
also just having the creativity to think without developer assumptions,
Yeah.
thinking, how can I jump into this weird state, even if they think it
Mhm.
is not possible. I see, yeah, a lot of the critical bugs are like this. You also see some that are simpler.
Yeah, like input validation, access control.
Exactly,
Yep.
exactly. But they start to be less and less frequent.
Of course. Yeah.
Uh, the bugs now require an actual deeper understanding, right? You can still see some bugs, and back in the day you would see a lot of bugs that were just, those lines. So even people that
Simple.
didn't understand anything about blockchain,
Yeah.
didn't understand anything about the EVM, still they would have this hacker mentality, or this threat modeling approach, where they would just managed to find the vulnerability anyways,
Mm.
even if they didn't understand very well why it was a vulnerability or something, but they managed to break the contract, so they report it, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super interesting. I would like to touch on, since you've gotten into this field and it's taken you, you've got, we all go through like those, jumping career pathways, stuff like that. I think if you were to, I guess, redo your whole career, or like at least redo getting into this field, rather, how would you kind of accelerate the whole process again? I think it's good to look back at it, right?
Sure. Yeah. I think it's good to like evaluate your decisions as well, just for better decision making in the future. I would love to have jumped into it sooner,
Right.
not just to find, not just to manage and to nail opportunities sooner, but just because the industry is so interesting. I wish somebody had talked about it in university, or
Right. Right.
something, because it's so interesting. And right now with work and stuff,
Yeah.
it's harder to sometimes have the time outside of work to dedicate to, like, continuing to learn some stuff that is outside of your normal work, right?
Yeah. So
Like diving into new languages, for example,
yeah.
or zk technology, all of those. I mean, there's so many rabbit holes in crypto that is insane.
Right.
uh,
Yeah.
but
So
with regards to my career path, I guess I would definitely have given more emphasis on public good building
Okay.
and on open source coding,
Yeah.
because it was something that I didn't have experience on.
Mm-hmm.
All my companies previously just had everything closed source,
Mm-hmm.
and it is super enjoyable to not only build your own things, but
Mm-hmm.
also to go to some other code and contribute. uh, it's really enjoyable. I really like it, and I should have dedicated maybe more time on that, because I didn't know it was such a valuable thing, not just for
Right.
yourself, but just for building
Others. Networking.
your yeah,
Got you.
definitely.
Yeah, and I guess what does your kind of like daily schedule look like in this ideal world where you want to do what you're doing efficiently and most effectively to get as much out as possible, most optimal, I guess. Yeah, what does your daily schedule kind of look like? Or if you're trying to
Sure.
like change it, if you're like currently changing it or want to change it, what does it look like to be most optimal?
Sure. So I started early working on Immunefi stuff. So like 8 a.m. I wake up earlier than that. Also have kids that wake up really early. Yeah, I start with Immunefi, and the morning is the time to me that really where I'm more mentally sharp. So on that time I will do very concentrated work, like deep work
Got you.
stuff, and yeah, just do a lot of Immunefi work. Eventually in the afternoon I will start transitioning. I always have like at least some education stuff to do, education slash researching portion of the day. For
Yeah.
example, right now I've been building some things with Node Guardians, which is a company does like some quests, some CTF style quests,
Mm-hmm.
like if it were with an RPG theme,
Yeah.
like a game. It's really interesting actually. I've been building some of those. It also provides me the experience of like trying out new stuff, new languages as well. Yeah, so I will have a dedicated time to that, and I would always have something. I have a list of articles and stuff like that. I would print at least a paper, which doesn't get read in a single day, but
Yeah.
I would print out a paper and an audit report, because I
Got you.
continue reading audit reports because I still think it's super valuable,
Beneficial. Yeah. Yeah.
and the papers will just be read throughout the days.
Yeah. Kind of like books and whatnot.
Yeah, I normally read books after like all this time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. At
in
night or
in
something.
during family time, basically, I do read a lot. Yeah, normally articles. I try to print most of them,
Mm-hmm.
just because I've been finding out that reading on the tabs on the internet is just a little bit more distracting.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, I've been going into all that rabbit hole of just how to how to
Stop
optimize
procrastinating.
those sort of things. Yeah, and and stop like tab surfing, I would say.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. And
uh,
what have you found from that actually?
yeah, I've implemented some things that work out really well for me. For example, I had just a ton of tabs because there's so many things that one wants to keep up with and
Yeah.
doesn't want to lose. So you either bookmark the heck out of just a ton of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
or you have so many open tabs. And what I was starting to have this experience that with so many tabs, I would
Mm.
continuously go through the tabs to recheck what I had. Like,
Yeah.
wait, what did I have on all the tabs? And I would open, and just waste a ton of time on that. So
Mm-hmm.
instead, I just write on a note. I have like a a note with future articles, right? Something like
Mm-hmm.
that, and I have it separated in categories. So
Got
if
you.
I end up seeing a new article, I will put it there, and
Yeah. Yeah.
it's actually it is very different because they are not open, so you can just look at the note and you have immediately like the title of it instead of needing to open the URL. You just have the title and the categories. So if you have time, you can go to, let's say I have like 20 minutes or something, so I can go to the small articles section and just grab a few of them, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe I have an hour, or for the weekend I go to the papers section and I print out a paper. I found that to work a lot with me.
Got you.
Also having a list that is like next articles to read, and if I want to really read another one, for example, Uniswap v4 just came out, right?
Yeah.
There's a new article on that or whatever. I really want to read that. I need to read first the five articles that I have on my next. So
Yeah.
only when I read those 5, I can
Move
input
on.
some others.
Right.
Anyways,
so you're not like
I'm just trying out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure, man. We are running out of time here, but I think it's been a pleasure. You've opened my eyes to the world of reviewing audits, audit reports. I think it's actually quite an interesting field now. I thought initially it was quite boring, but now I can definitely see the value in just reading reports. And I think anybody trying to get into what you're doing or auditing, they should definitely read reports from the best, people that have found criticals and just like top tier, I guess, companies as well. Maybe do you think top tier companies do really good reports as well? Or
Yeah. There's a lot of companies that also bug hunt.
Yeah.
And yeah, definitely they do good reports. Though I mean, some audit reports from high ranked firms might not be that good, just the auditing ones, because they might just try to like increase the severity more than it actually is. I see that happening often. Yeah.
And that's not beneficial in long term, is it?
No, that's not at all. Just like I had shared one on Twitter. I will not name the firm, but it is a high rank one that had a report which on a bug that was just it was not a bug. It was like instead of using the ownable, like having an owner, just recommending to use the two-step ownership, which is like you have a function call that starts the transitioning to an address, and then that address needs to accept the ownership. Anyways, it is to avoid you mistakenly sending the ownership to some other address, but it was considered like a high vulnerability, which is like, what? It's not even like a vulnerability per se. It would be like a recommendation, right?
Yeah, right. Interesting.
But maybe they have like incentives to increase the severity. I don't know.
I guess it makes them seem like they've done more work than they actually have, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I guess like if that's shown or publicly shown, then I guess it gets called out, right? And then the reputation goes down, which I think.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's not worth to do it if anybody's thinking of doing that. But yeah, man, it's been such a pleasure. I think it's been an amazing chat. I've really enjoyed this, and I hope you've also enjoyed this. But I hope a lot of people will find value in this, and I sure did. So yeah, man, I'm keen to see what the future holds for you and this space. Yeah. So lovely having you on. It's been a pleasure, and yeah, hopefully catch you again soon.
Thank you very much for having me.
Of course. Everybody, take care.